Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cash Flow Positive. My name is Kenny Bedwell, and I'm going to be hosting this episode solo today and talking about how you can make money on the buy. And it really flows in well with the topic that I've really been pushing this year is we are real estate investors first. Okay, I know that's more like a statement, but a lot of times in the short-term rental space, we get caught up in how am I going to operate? How am I going to market my property? How am I going to be and compete with the best? But the reality is, if you set yourself up for success from the beginning by buying correctly, it's a lot easier to accomplish those other things. It's not that we don't diminish those things. It's that we need to nail the purchase first and buy right and make money on the buy. And then it makes our lives a lot easier to operate and compete. And frankly, in my opinion, it also gives you an opportunity to not have to be the best operator or the best at, hospitality and all these other things, where a lot of deals, a lot of people who bought poorly, meaning they bought at the top of the market, maybe they overpaid for a property, they over leveraged or overspent on amenities and stuff. It forces them to have to operate at a very, very, very high level, meaning they have to be on top. Like if they get a 4-star review, that could be very detrimental to their rating, right? They have to have 5 stars so they can rank higher because they have to pay that monthly mortgage bill that everyone gets, but theirs is a little bit higher than everybody else's. A little bit more pressure, right? How do we avoid that? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, if this is your first time listening to the Cash Flow Positive podcast, welcome aboard. My name is Kenny Bedwell. I'm a very call it as I see it kind of guy. And frankly, especially recently, as the market has stabilized in the short-term rental space, I see a lot of people, especially realtors, brokers, gurus out there, pumping certain projections or certain ways of doing things that are just flat out incorrect and can cause a lot of people to make mistakes. My job on this podcast is to call those out and help you understand and see through the crap and know how you can make a wise and prudent financial decision if you decide to enter in, or maybe you're already in and want to expand your portfolio. Okay. And I believe it all starts with making money on the buy. But it's this concept that we are real estate investors first, right? We're doing this as an investment. Okay. Number one. And number two, that doing as an investment means it needs to make money, right? And in order for it to make money, there's really, in my opinion, 2 major ways. Now, you could argue there are more, but there's 2 major ways that I'm going to emphasize. Number one, the property has to cash flow, okay? Meaning all of our net proceeds at the end of the year, what am I left with? Did it make money? Did it lose money? Did it break even? Number two, it needs to appreciate. This one people are struggling with. And I'm seeing all different kinds of conflicting information online that's causing just misinformation. And that's what we really need to focus on and understand today is how I can take advantage of and find a cash flowing property that I didn't overpay for that will appreciate over time. Okay. So making money on the buy has everything to do with understanding after repair value. All right. From this moment forward, I'm going to call after repair value ARV. So if you hear ARV, you know it means after repair value. Okay. So first off, what does after repair ARV mean? So it basically means that after you buy a property and you put money into it to improve it, okay, this is vague, but improve the property, what is now the new value of that property? All right. So theoretically, like when you repair something, right, there could be, doesn't mean the property has things wrong with it. It just means that there's opportunity to improve it to make it better. Therefore, it should be worth more. Now, there is a conflicting amount of information about this in the short-term rental space that we have to break down. And I see this actually quite frequently. So let's talk about the market real quick. So in the last few years, we've seen a wide range of what people believe properties are worth, okay? Because of the high of COVID and the prices were so high. But as interest rates creeped up, technically prices have either stabilized, they've still gone up slightly in the last few years, but really some of them have gone down, especially in markets like Florida and the Smokies in some areas, right? And so, however, obviously sellers think that their house is always worth more than what it really is. But at the same time, too, there's a trailing data. Okay. So people who are looking at prices of homes can only know assume what the value is based not what people are willing to pay for them. This doesn't actually work like that. It's what the banks are willing to loan on. But what are the banks willing to loan or lend on essentially? They're looking at what appraisers say that they are. And so what's going on is that appraisals in various markets across the country have been all over the place. Some have been very high, meaning someone is under contract for $1 million and their property was appraised at 1.5 million, which is great for that person, right? They have that supposedly $500,000 of equity, okay, that they can theoretically tap into. Or if they needed to resell, they could resell it for 1.5. Some appraisals in some markets have been coming in low, meaning you have that property for $1 million, but the guy says it's only worth 800,000. Well, that's a big problem. So but the issue is that appraisals across the country have been all over the place, to where the point is you almost don't even know what's going to happen. Even the realtor who supposedly has sales comps, so where they're pulling this appraisal from, doesn't really know what's going to happen either. Okay. And this has caused a lot of confusion. On one hand, you have people who are, wow, I put, $200,000 into my property of design, decor, and amenities and some other improvements, and now my property is worth $500,000 more. You have other people who put the same amount of money, but now their property is only worth $50,000 more. There's actually really no rhyme or reason to it. However, and when you look at it from like a step back. And so what's happening though is the people who have the success are projecting that success and telling other people, do exactly what I did, and you'll get the same success. It doesn't matter the market, just do what I'm doing. But that's not reality. It's actually a mixed bag. And that's where very smart, savvy investors like yourself who are listening to this podcast can understand and see through the crap and know how to actually calculate and understand if your property will appraise for more. Because in reality, there is a way to do it. Okay. That is mathematical and it's pretty close and is what actual investors are doing. Remember, we are real estate investors first. We can't just lean on what someone else says that worked for them last year, the year before, or even before then, and try to replicate this same thing, assuming we'll get the exact same results. Okay. That doesn't even sound right to begin with. So learn this process and learn how we can try to improve value or make money on the buy is essentially what it is. So the ARV. Okay. So let's dive into it. So how do we calculate after repair value? Number one, after repair value, improving after repair value is all based on making improvements that add value to the property. Emotional value is not actual value to the property. It cannot be physically calculated, and therein lies the problem. So what is emotional valued things added to a property? Lighting, design, furnishings, aesthetics, anything that looks, in a sense, we have to be careful with the aesthetics thing, but emotional value is extremely hard to calculate. However, other types of value, like improvements, like updating the countertops, renovating a bathroom, right? Like bringing it into this decade or this century, even in some properties. Okay, adding landscaping, even a swimming pool. Those things can add physical value, putting in a fence. They can add physical value to a property and can help. And we can actually figure out, and within a range, I want to be careful with this. You can't know, okay, well, if I add a bathroom, I'm going to make, my property is now going to be worth $50,000. Okay, it doesn't work like that. But adding improving a bathroom, not adding a bathroom. Adding a bathroom is an actual value add in a sense. Improving a bathroom, though, and renovating a bathroom will add value to your property. How much so? That's where the math comes in. Okay, so when we're looking at a property, and if we buy a property at the top of the market, meaning it's this 5 bedrooms are all selling for $500,000, and you buy a $500,000 5-bedroom, if you spend money on improving that property, how much value are you really adding to it? Virtually none. right? Well, I renovated the bathrooms and the kitchen and all the other stuff, but you bought it at the top of the market. Okay. How after repair value is determined, how appraisers are appraising properties is based off of comparable properties sold. Okay. Comparable properties sold, not commercial properties sold, not properties based off how much STR income they're making, residential properties sold. Now, if you're in a vacation market, 9 times out of 10, the properties that sold are vacation rentals, right? And they might have made, they might have been making really good revenue or not, but that doesn't matter because short-term rentals are considered residential real estate. And so what they're worth is based on residential comps sold. So if you buy a 5-bedroom at $500,000 and every other 5-bedroom is selling at $500,000 that's in the same type of location, and you put in all this money into lighting and amenities like pickleball courts and hot tubs and bocce ball and a cool game room, you convert that theater room into livable square footage. I heard that one recently. What do you think your property is going to be worth? Best case scenario, 505, 510, right? Now, obviously, if you go higher in purchase price, that ratio could change slightly, but it's not going to be dollar for dollar of what you put into the property. See, the problem is people think that they can just inject a ton of capital without being strategic on what they are specifically adding that's considered real value. So you have to understand what real value is when you're trying to determine and make money on the buy. Okay. So what I do, let's talk about this. So number one, I alluded to this already, but don't buy at the top of the market. Don't buy when you're buying a 6-bedroom and you're going to pour a bunch of money into a 6-bedroom. Don't buy a 6-bedroom that's the most expensive 6-bedroom in the market already, right? Like that's a duh. Okay. So now the other argument I see, and this is what some people do, and it can work, but it's also variable because they don't actually know, is they will try to increase bedroom count. All right. Now, for Airbnb bedroom count, they don't have any rules or regulations. That means that the septic systems don't have to be rated a certain amount. It doesn't have to have an egress window to be considered a bedroom. In fact, you can literally name any space in an Airbnb a bedroom, right? But we know that you shouldn't do that. Hopefully, you know that. But the point I'm getting at is we don't want to go in and just assume, well, I can put a bed in here, therefore it's a bedroom. We have to make it legal. We have to go in with a plan. So some people will buy a 4 or 5 bedroom at the top of the market, but they know they're going to add bedrooms to it, legal bedrooms that's based on what the county and the city or the municipality define as a legal bedroom to improve value. And it might be updating or upgrading the septic system. In fact, I was looking at a property in Watkins Glen, New York. That was literally like right down the road from mine. I have a property in Watkins Glen. You guys already know that if you've listened to this for a while. I found another one and I was like, dang, that is a cool cabin. It's on some land. I could do something special with that. And it was a 3-bedroom. And I was like, it's got a lot of square footage. How can I make it a 4 or even a 5? Right? So I looked at the rules. And number one, it has to be permitted, or the septic has to be permitted as a 4 or 5. So the next question is, can I update the septic system? Well, then I looked at it and the septic field for a 5-bedroom had to be a certain size. It was not physically impossible or possible to improve the septic system to make it a 5. It could only be a 4. Okay. So then at that point, then I was looking at it and I called the town and they said, well, actually, this property is not even a legal 3-bedroom. It's a legal 2-bedroom because the window of the 3rd bedroom doesn't have an egress. They didn't get the permit. They didn't get a permit when they updated that property. And that bedroom doesn't even count as a legal bedroom. Therefore, you can't even rent it out as a 3-bedroom. So I'm like, okay, so I have to put in an extra window to make that a legal bedroom. Then I have to update the septic system. And even then, the bedrooms were too small to do 2 per person. Look, now I'm forcing something, right? I'm forcing the opportunity. But a lot of people aren't doing that research. They're not doing that due diligence to understand the legality side of it, to know if you can truly force that appreciation. And that's how a lot of people are getting burned by simply just going, well, I'm just going to add a bedroom and that's going to force it. Like I see people all the time, realtors all the time going, well, there's this huge walk-in closet in the master room that you could convert into a bedroom. Okay, that is a massive red flag. You need to have an egress window. It needs to have heating and cooling and a closet in most states and areas to be considered a legal bedroom. So not only is that a safety concern to just put beds in there, but it's also not going to improve value. But they're treating it like it will. Well, that's more livable square, or that's an extra bedroom. Then you can add that in there. Another thing I'm seeing too is people are converting garages. Now, none of this stuff I'm saying is wrong. It's not like, oh, you can't do that, but understand the rules from a legality standpoint and what the market says is a legal bedroom, what makes it a legal bedroom, right? So that's the stuff that gets left out that I see a lot of STR investors, especially new ones, getting left at the altar essentially when they're done with this project and they finally get an appraisal back and it's not what they had expected because they didn't know how to actually calculate ARV. They were guessing because someone told them to pay $400,000 into a property that it would just magically make it worth a lot more because they did it one time and it worked out for them. But the things they're leaving out is improving square footage, livable square footage, and that could be variable, right? Some people don't count, some areas don't count converted garages to livable square footage, even if it's a game room. Okay. Now, some do, some don't. So you have to know, you have to talk to investors in that market or a competent realtor in that regard, or even call appraisers and just understand what are things that can improve value, like real value into the property. Did you know if you spend $100,000 on a pool, it maybe improves the value of the property by $20,000? So you don't even get that back. It's not a one for one. So when you're calculating and trying to determine ARV, always start with legally, what are the options? What does a property have to be able to improve the ARV, to even improve that and force that appreciation to make money on the buy, right? And look, if you buy at the top of the market and you legally improve the bedroom count and increase the square footage of the property to, like let's say you take a 4,000 square foot house and make it a 5,000 or 6,000. Okay, now you have a property that will be legally appraised on a 5,000 or 6, whatever you increased it to. Okay, and it's going to be appraised, should be appraised a lot more. You theoretically made money on the buy, right? Like that's a good example of making money on the buy. Now, the next part is like, how much money did you have to inject into it to get to that point? That's another story. Okay. The other conundrum I'm seeing, now let's kind of move over a little bit. The other conundrum I'm seeing are people are taking the wrong comps and realtors are taking the wrong comps, saying, well, I know of a property that was sold for this or is worth this. And this is, if you turn it into the same square footage or whatever, but they're negating to tell you key pieces of information of like, well, it's in a particular neighborhood where all the other homes are that have certain amenities, or this one's beachfront and yours is not beachfront, right? Or what's one I saw? This one is and the neighborhood thing is very real. I've seen that one before. It's in a certain neighborhood and that neighborhood's valued more than some of the other parts because it's in a better school district and all these other things that like STR investors aren't looking for because they're not thinking about the residential side. But that's actually how short-term rentals are appraised. They're residential real estate. What's being sold is this idea that short-term rentals are worth what they're worth based on how much revenue they generate. That's not true. That's not how banks appraise them. Okay. Now, look, people had experiences. Well, my property was making 200,000. I was able to sell it for over $1 million because it was making over 200,000, and some investor bought it and it appraised. Like I said, these things do happen, but they're not by like there's no guarantees with that. And in fact, there's less people that have that situation than you would actually believe. Meaning, like, there's a lot of people who think that and then they try to do it and it doesn't work out for them. That's a gamble. That's a risk. Why would you do that? What if you could just actually figure out, well, I think my ARV is actually this, right? And then you're within a range, so you know what you can sell it for, right? And if you can sell it for more than that, great, right? And it appraises, assuming it appraises, right? It's all upon the appraisal. But we've got to go back to the basics, the fundamentals of real estate investing, and understanding ARV and what legally you can do. Okay. And then the next part is just simply how to calculate it. All right. Now, let's talk about how to calculate it. So ARV is determined by sales comps in the area. So properties that are sold in the area that have certain attributes that you're going to do to your property. Remember, residential comps and certain attributes. Well, I'm turning mine to a short-term rental. So guess what that means about that pickleball court and those nice, couches and the nice string lighting you put around and the game room you did? It means nothing. Those literally mean nothing to the value of the property. What they're comparing your property against are residential comps that are updated. Okay. So depending on what you update and what those properties have, that's what they're going to compare to. So you can do this research before you buy anywhere. So if you go, I'm going to buy a 4-bedroom and convert it to a 6 or 5 to a 6, whatever you're going to do, a 5 to a 6-bedroom, we'll use that example. Then I can go look at what 6 bedrooms are comping out as renovated, assuming you're going to do that to your 5-bedroom at the same square footage. Or if you're improving square footage, what is that going to give you? Okay. So there's another misconception too, that getting the appraisal, the after repair value appraisal, if you don't like the appraisal, you can just go get another one. Okay. While that's partly true, if you're trying to exit and resell, or you're trying to refinance, meaning recapture the funds out of that property or get a lower down payment, who's actually picking your appraisal? You are? No, you don't get to pick the appraiser. Your bank is. Right? Now, there are instances where you can say, hey, I would like to use this appraiser. Is that someone who is qualified or like approved by your bank? Does your bank approve this? They have like approved appraisers that they'll use. But if it's just a regular Joe Schmo, he might be licensed, but the bank might not approve it. So really, the appraisers are chosen by the banks. You can request another appraisal all day long, but it's based on their approved list. Once again, that's another gamble if you don't know how to calculate ARV. It is. It just is, because you're assuming that somebody else who might have used a different bank or didn't even use a bank at all, you don't even know their situation, got an appraisal, and it could have just been a desk appraisal, meaning that they hired, you can just hire a random appraiser to appraise your property so you just know what the value is. That doesn't mean you could sell it at that or anyone's going to buy it at that. It doesn't mean it's going to refinance that, because the bank and the seller's bank or the buyer's bank are going to be the ones who pick the appraiser. So it's more of like a good to know or good feeling, but at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter. So if you're relying on what someone else is telling you about their situation and what they did without understanding their particular loan details or what exactly they did or the type of appraiser, or was it like we call it a desk appraisal, meaning like you literally just go online, you hire appraisal to come out and do your property, right? You're not getting a bank loan. You're not selling the property. You're just wanting to know what the worth of the property is for future plans. That's called a desk appraisal. Okay. Very easy to get. And you just pay for appraisal. But then, so was it a desk appraisal? You don't know these things because they're not telling you. And frankly, you're not asking. You don't know to ask, maybe. But all of that stuff you have to be careful with. It can all be calculated down. So what we do is we're looking at sales comp. So we're looking at the comps, okay? And the number one strategy that most real estate investors use is they will look at the sold comps and they'll use that number. But more importantly, they'll do something they'll call price per square foot. So if you're improving the square footage of a property, okay, and maybe you're leveling up on bedroom count, you would then look at, we'll say 5 to 6s. You would look at 6 bedrooms at 3,000 square feet or whatever the square footage is. And then you would average those sales comps price per square foot together. And that tells you what the ARV rough number is going to be. Or you could do a range. If you have 5 or 6 properties, you take the range of that. But the reality is you average it together and use that to calculate what, based on the improvements you're going to be adding to the property. I mean, that's the very, very rough and the way that most people take it. So meaning I look in a market and I look at finished comps and I look at their after repair value, but I look at the price per square foot. Okay. And then when I'm trying to make money on the buy, I'm taking that price per square foot and I'm looking at what that property is listed at. Now, I'm not trying to get the same price per square foot because that's the after repair value. I'm trying to make the difference. There's a 70% rule, meaning that you want to be 70% of the purchase price of the after repair value, but it'd be 70% of so like if the price per square foot's $100 per square foot, you'd want to be buying that property at $70 per square foot. So you have a little bit of a delta basis. But it depends on what you're doing to the property though, ultimately, right? So there's a little bit more math into it that it can't be all detailed in this podcast episode. But starting with a price per square foot of the finished comps, knowing what the end result's going to look like and what that's valued at is really how you get to know what the after repair value is. So when we're looking at these, so for example, when I bought with the investors and everybody we did the hotel in New Orleans, okay, that property we were looking at, when I was looking at the numbers, I was like, okay, what do we think our ARV is? And we had to go get an appraisal. And that was a really fun process. Okay. So the bank would only lend based off an appraiser of what they thought was going to be done with it. But we're also looking at sold comps in the area, right? So what are properties selling for? And the guy, it's kind of the guy was like, well, what do you need it to appraise for? It's literally what the appraiser asked me. It's commercial, but this is different, right? He's looking at income and he's also looking at sold similar comps in the area, which there weren't many. So he's looking at both of those factors and going, well, okay, what does this need to be at to work? And so it appraised, we bought it for 1.495 and it appraised for 2.3. So the bank was, giving us a loan for the renovations and we had to cover this cost and so on. So long story short, when it's done, we're going to get it reappraised. I guarantee you it's going to appraise for a lot more than 2.3. Like I guarantee it. So we shall see, but I say guarantee. Hopefully I'm not wrong on that. I'm pretty sure because like what they were seeing versus like what it was before versus what we're doing with it is not even on the same level. But regardless of that, like ARV really just drives a lot of good real estate investing decisions. Okay. And so that's where it's not simply will this property cash flow? Because that is important. That's like another part. But it's, can I force some appreciation in the deal so I make money on the buy? Or am I just throwing amenities and furnishings in and hoping that the play here is simply cash flow? It's a buy and hold, or what I call a buy and pray. We have to be better about this, guys. We have to, understand what real after repair value looks like. I'm seeing a lot of realtors online, even some brokers, pumping out some wild numbers of what they think the ARV actually is, but they don't know how to calculate ARV. It's kind of interesting, actually. They're like, oh, yeah, this is the ARV. It's like comparables. But then you ask them about the comparables, and they're not even like remotely like close or like what they're not real, And then you're like, okay, so adding some pretty lights and, a pool and all this is also going to make it improve, like be worth $1 million more. It doesn't even make sense saying it out loud, So it's one of those things where but you don't know. It could like there could be some crazy appraiser who does that, assuming it's with an approved appraiser by a bank if they're doing the refinance, right? It's a whole nother level. I mean, you could pay someone a desk appraisal and they could say it's worth whatever $1 million more, but that doesn't mean anything unless you sell or refinance or reposition. Essentially, it's debt equity. So you gotta be confident and know the numbers, not just from a cash flow perspective, but an improvement value perspective. You're never going to be 100%. Just like your cash flow, you can make a guess, and that's why we always run ranges. But the reality is, at the end of the day, if you're doing both of these things, understanding how to calculate cash flow on a range, understanding how to calculate ARV on a range, you're going to make money on your buy, and you're going to have a really good investment because you've made double sure that it makes sense. Because so worst case scenario, if you don't get the ARV you're looking for, you still have a really good cash flowing property, right? And it's not a bad deal. It's not the end of the world. It just means you have to hold it longer to make up for all the money you invested into it as a short-term rental. Whereas on the flip side, if it has really good ARV, and you've got all this equity and maybe it doesn't make as much money as you thought, you could sell it or refi it. You'd probably sell it point because if you refied it, you would take on more debt and the cash would be even lower. And that doesn't make any sense. So you would sell it and then you made money. So this like double-headed dragon approach comes in, and that's what making money on the buy means. That's what makes a good real estate investor in 2026. So sum it all up, guys. Really focus on ARV. Price per square foot is a great place to start. All right. Now, I know it's not a perfect system. Please don't at me. Please don't DM me about that. But the reality is it's a good place to start. It's a good place to help you understand how to think about ARV and what truly brings value to the property and what you're going to be at so you're not just guessing and relying on someone else's word who didn't do the exact same stuff as you, who had a different situation. Be smart, be savvy, be a good investor. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I think this is going to be a single episode. I don't have anybody else coming in and talk about ARV or anything crazy. So that's the episode. And that's the episode for the week. As I mentioned, if you found this helpful, if you're a first-time listener, or if you haven't done this yet, would love a review, guys. Would absolutely love a review. Leave it in Spotify or iTunes. I actually read them and love the feedback. And if you think you'd love to hear a particular topic or have a guest on the show, feel free to DM me at Kenny_Bedwell on Instagram or Facebook. If you're not following me there, give me a follow. You'll enjoy the content I put out. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cash Flow Positive.